Hello! I think I should call these videos, at least these few ones, The Blue Room with Greg Twigg, talking about After Effects, because this silly window behind me is creating all of this light, which interferes with the camera's interpretation of the most wonderful thing about this video, my face, and then like the wood tone of those blinds, it's wooden, it's yellow, and so then it counteracts it and goes in the opposite direction, and it's very blue. What can we do? But we're not here to look at me. We're here to look at After Effects. Today, this moment in time, we're going to jump into layers. This is going to be a real brief introduction to getting a layer from After Effects into a composition, talking about what that means. There are a lot of different types of layers, but this one is just the very first one. We're going to get into all of the others as we move along here. I have a empty composition just waiting for some magic to happen. So I'm going to create a composition. Well, I said I had a composition. It was a project with no composition in it. Now I have a composition getting started. I don't want a red background. I want it to be black. And we got our HDTV setting. I'm going to call this layers number 1. For the sake of these little tutorials, I'm going to only do like 5 seconds. It'll work. All right, now I have the empty composition and it's waiting for me to do something with it. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a layer. I did mention that there are all sorts of layers. If you brought in a Photoshop file that has 22 layers, you can bring that in either as a Photoshop file as one layer, just flattened and squished, kind of like a JPEG. Oh, my stylus just totally fell apart. Or you could import it as a Photoshop file with all the layers, and you'd have 22 layers. A movie file can be a layer, an audio file can be a layer, an Illustrator file can be a single layer, or if you've broken it up to 16 layers, you can import that as 16 layers. So there's lots of things that become layers. But inside of After Effects, there are only a few layers that you can create. And you can do a lot with those, to be honest with you. In order to get a layer into this composition, I need to make sure a couple things are sort of in order. If you have your project window selected, see how it has a little blue outline around it, and I go to layer, I can't do anything with it. If I went to this window, I now can. If I went to the timeline window, there's now something available. So if you are trying to add a layer or do something at any time in After Effects, and you're like, well, wait a minute, it's supposed to be there. Just think about what you have selected, where your cursor is, and all that stuff, and make sure that you're thinking ahead. So I want to put a layer in my timeline or in my composition, so I make sure I have that window selected. Now when I go to layer, the new option is available, and I have all of these different types of layers that I can bring in just from After Effects. A text layer could be a layer. A solid is just a solid color. A light, this gets into 3D work, which we'll have a little bit of experience with this semester. A camera, same thing. The null object, this is something that we will use at some point down the road, but it's null. You won't see anything. It specifically is there so that you can control other layers through one layer, and it's fantastic, but for another time. A shape layer is similar to a solid, only it gives you a little more control over what that shape looks like. We'll get there eventually as well. An adjustment layer is a layer that would affect other layers by like adding an effect or a color change, that sort of a thing. Content aware fill layer, we probably won't even get here. This is getting a little too advanced. Photoshop file, we'll do it a different way. And then a Cinema 4D file, which is working with 3D files from Cinema 4D Lite or Cinema 4D, I guess. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start off with a solid. And the solid opens up a solid settings window. And here I'm just going to call it layer 1. Just so I have a little better idea of what that means. Otherwise, it's just the color name. So this was a yellow, and if I just do this again, orange, sorry, it's orange. It's an orange solid 1. Well, it doesn't really do me a lot of good unless I needed to definitely call it orange for whatever design purposes. By default, these solids will occupy the dimensions of your composition unless you've already created a solid at a different size, and then you go back to create another solid. It'll be whatever the size of the last solid was. So if I made this solid 200 by 200, the next time I went to create a new solid, it would be 200 by 200. So if I did that, I'll actually do 400 by 400, just so we can kind of take a look at what that means down the road. My units are pixels. That's great. We're working in a screen environment. Pixels are ideal. My pixel aspect ratio, square pixels, it should match the composition that you're working in. So the composition that I'm using is an HD square pixel comp. So that should be compatible with that. So the other thing, well, I'll do this first. I'm going to make a little orange solid. This is the color. You can click on it and pick any color you want. I'll just keep it orange for now, and I'll hit OK. Now what that does is it puts a solid in my composition as a layer. So now I have one layer, and I can then move it around, rotate it, scale it, put effects on it, put a mask on it, whatever. I'm just going to move it over right now because I want to make another one. I'm going to say layer, new, solid. So here you can see it goes back to the color name again. So I'm going to call it layer 2. And it's the same dimensions as the last one. So keep that in mind as you make new solids, because you might want to change that. If I went to, 600 by 600, and I'll change the color to, I don't know. Sure. And now I'll hit OK. There's the new one. It's slightly bigger. And I have a second layer in my composition. So if I go back to layer, new, solid, and I want a background color for my entire project, then I can click make comp size, and it just says, okay, cool, your comp is 1920 by 1080. That's what the size of this solid will be. So then I could pick a different color. Oh dear. I'll go with a slightly off-white, very light gray. And there it is. It's the full size of my comp. And all I had to do was just say, hey, make comp size. But now it's obscured the other layers. So I have to think about my layer hierarchy just like I would in Photoshop or Illustrator or any other program that uses layers, because it's the topmost layer that is dominant in its visibility. So if I want that to be the background, then I should drag that layer down to the bottom and change that up. So now I can see all three layers that are here in the comp. These three layers will now become part of my project and the wonderful creation that is going to be some very geometric motion graphic. I'm not going to move anything right now. But so these layers are all right here. You can see that as you select them, it changes the handles on your composition. I just double clicked on layer 1. Oh, I didn't name that one. I'll talk about that in a second. If I double click on a layer, it opens it up in a new tab in the composition window, and it's called a layer view. So I'm now looking at specifically just that layer. It no longer has anything to do really with my composition. It has to do with that layer. So it just shows me that I've got an orange square. This will happen a lot while you do your work. Get used to it. It's fine. All you have to do is click back on the tab for your composition, and it takes you back to your work. Or you just close that little tab out and it's gone. So if I double click on layer 2, it takes me to the layer tab in that window where I can do some specific things. Sometimes you have to open some footage or a layer in this window in order to execute a specific task. like tracking or rotoscoping, things like that. So, I'm using a tablet, so sometimes you click kind of quick, or it thinks you're double clicking, and then it could do that. So be ready for those little snags. I can turn these layers on or off with the visibility, and that is a permanent thing if I were to render it out. If I turn that blue one off and I render my movie, the blue one will just not be there because I have said just go away. That's something to keep in mind. If I solo the blue layer, everything else in the timeline goes away and I just get to look at the blue one or just the yellow one. This is nice when you're trying to do some management. You've got a lot of keyframes going on. You got a lot of other motion and just lots of work, but you want to just pinpoint on one thing. You can solo as many layers as you want. I could just say I want to solo the 2 colored squares and the other one goes away. This is not a permanent thing. You can still render the movie and it'll render everything. So hiding something or soloing it, hiding it is permanent. Soloing it is not. It's just temporary while you work. You can lock your layers so that you don't futz with them. Like a background is a good time to lock it. That way, if I just kind of accidentally click off of it, I'm not going to move it. If it's not locked and I kind of click and whatever, maybe I move it and I go, oh shoot, that's not what I wanted to do. So if something's in a good place, you're not going to futz with it for a while, go ahead and lock it. What else? Okay, yeah, so in the project window, when you create a solid, it's going to put it in a folder. It created a folder, and now all the solids that you make are going to be inside the solids folder. What I like about that is it's encouraging us to be organized, and we should follow the leads. So anytime you bring in audio, make an audio folder, keep all your audio files in there, etc. It's just a really good habit. All right, well, that is going to conclude layers part 1. We're going to get into some more elaborate stuff with layers here very shortly. And then the magic will happen. I know this is all like, nothing, this isn't moving, this isn't animation. It's fine. It just takes a little time to make sure that you're ready for it. And we're really getting there. All right, thanks.